Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Gaming here. Back to the video. Today's episode, we're taking a look at Elemental Shaman for Mythic Plus Season 3 of the War Within. As I preface all my guides with, this is going to be a beginner's guide or just somebody coming back to Elemental Shaman who hasn't played it in a while. The idea behind this is to give you enough information to get you up to a Mythic Plus 10 key. So if you're an extremely advanced player and you're pushing really high keys, this is not going to be the guide for you. That being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. So let's kind of discuss some of the, I guess, the core resource that Elemental Shaman uses, and that is something called a Maelstrom. So Maelstrom is a resource that you will build up, and then you'll spend that on some of your harder hitting abilities. So for example, something like Elemental Blast, something like your Earthquake, all uses a Maelstrom resource. And what you want to do is you want to focus on not over capping on this. So you see we go up to 150 Maelstrom. So once you get high on Maelstrom, you want to make sure that you're spending it, because if you overcap on Maelstrom, it is literally wasted damage. All right, let's go over some of our basic spells here really quick. So first spell I want to go over here is our Flame Shock. This is basically a damage over time effect that you put on the target. It takes your fire damage and it generates us some Maelstrom. Now there's also some synergy with our Lava Burst. So Lava Burst is also going to generate some Maelstrom. You get a couple charges of this. And if Flame Shock is on the target, your Lava Burst will always critically strike. So we'll go to a dummy. I'll show you what that looks like. We can Lava Burst. Okay, well, critical strike there. Let's see if this one does. Okay, so that one did not critical strike. And then if I put Flame Shock on the target, it will guarantee a critical strike every single time if that Flame Shock is on the target. Now, we also have some synergy with something here called Lava Surge. So each tick of Flame Shock has a chance to proc this Lava Surge. And basically what this does is it makes your Lava Burst, it resets the cooldown on your Lava Burst, and it also makes it instant cast. So just to share what that looks like, we will we'll spread out some Flame Shocks here, and we'll see if we can get this to proc. And as we spread out our Flame Shocks, here it is, it's procced already. But as we spread out our Flame Shocks, we have a higher and higher chance to proc this Lava Surge proc, because we're getting more ticks of Flame Shock, right? So here's the proc, and this means now our Lava Burst is instant cast, and that also reset the cooldown of our Lava Burst, or reset the charge on it. So if we were at like 0 charges and we got a Lava Burst proc, we would automatically get 1 charge, even if it's still on cooldown. So yeah, we'll talk about that more when we get into the rotation and whatnot. We also have like our core filler spells. So we have our Chain Lightning here. This will generate Maelstrom for us. This is typically used in AOE. We have our Lightning Bolt that generates Maelstrom for us. This is our filler used in single target. Another core spell that we have here is our Elemental Blast, and this is actually taken from our talent tree. This is towards the very top of our talent tree. You can pick between that and Earth Shock. And Elemental Blast is pretty unique because this actually increases our stats. So the damage from Elemental Blast is really nice, but this increases our critical strike, haste, or mastery for 10 seconds. So this spell, gives you more stats, makes everything hit a little bit harder. We also have a spell here called Earthquake as well. Sorry, there's Earth Elemental. Here's Earthquake. And this is one of our main Maelstrom spenders. So Elemental Blast that we just talked about is a Maelstrom spender, and then Earthquake is also a Maelstrom spender. So these are your two pretty much hardest, most impactful, hardest hitting, most impactful spells on your bar in terms of Maelstrom, right? So this will basically put down an AOE effect, and enemies in it have a chance to get knocked down, and they also take a whole bunch of damage while they stay within the Earthquake. So see our Maelstrom here as we cast Chain Lightning, right? That Maelstrom builds, and you can see now our Elemental Blast becomes available to us. Now, one thing you need to know about Earthquake is we're also taking the talent Echoes of Sundering. So after casting Earth Shock, your next Earthquake does 120% additional damage. After casting Elemental Blast, your next Earthquake does 140% additional damage. So since we're not taking Earth Shock, your Elemental Blast is basically going to beef up your next Echoes of Sundering. So just to quickly show you guys what that looks like, let's quickly build up some Maelstrom here. And I want to proc the Echoes of the Great Sundering here with our Elemental Blast, so we'll cast it. And now we have a proc here of Echoes of the Great Sundering. So our next spender now needs to be Earthquake. And now that Earthquake got buffed by a whole bunch of damage, by 120% additional damage. Or excuse me, 140% additional damage since we're using Elemental Blast. So that's kind of the synergy between that. Is in AOE, you want to rotate between Elemental Blast and Earthquake. In single target, you will ignore Earthquake, even if you do get a Echoes of Great Sundering proc. Okay, there's that. I think that's it for most of the core spells. Oh, that's not true. There's actually one more thing I want to talk about, and that's going to be our Ice Fury. Actually, there's 2 other things I want to talk about. So we have our Ice Fury here. So we have a chance for our lightning spells to basically make our Frost Shock turn into something called Ice Fury. And most of the time, in AoE at least, especially AoE, but also single target, is you want to save this for movement phases. So by itself, this is more of like a filler spell. It doesn't do like a ton of damage, but it does allow us to cast while on the move. So this will be lower in the priority in both single target and AoE. And we'll do a small rotation here so you guys can kind of see what that looks like. And here it is. You can see our Frost Shock has procced with Ice Fury, and we can cast that while moving. And you can see here, now we get this buff, Ice Fury Frost Shock damage increased by 200%. And I guess one final thing with this is Fusion of Elements. So after we use our Ice Fury, we actually get a proc of Fusion of Elements that's going to make our next Nature or Fire spell deal increased damage. This also does generate a decent amount of Maelstrom. So, just know it's there. You'll use it in some very specific situations, but it's not like a huge sort of damage spell. We also have our Tempest, which is a huge damage spell. So we're talking about Maelstrom. You build up this Maelstrom bar, and every 300 that we spend, our Lightning Bolt is replaced with Tempest. So wherever your Lightning Bolt is on your bar, that's going to turn into this Tempest spell. And anytime that this procs is, you want to use this on cooldown anytime it procs. So, just be careful with it. It can kind of sneak up on you since it replaces your Lightning Bolt. But we'll take a quick look at that, right? So let's cast some spells here. And basically we'll have to spend, right? We have to spend 300 Maelstrom. So we'll cast some spells. I'll make a cut here in the video so you don't have to watch me build up and spend 300 Maelstrom. Just kidding, it literally just procced. Here it is, Tempest. And you can see it procced here, but there's no like flashing indicator or anything to show that it's procced. And you can see it is ticking down. We got 13 seconds to use it. There's a cast time associated. And when you cast that, it's a huge burst of damage. And you see we also got a proc of something called Arc Discharge, which makes our next Lightning Bolt Chain Lightning instant cast. And the Arc Discharge, of course, comes from our hero talent tree. And I keep saying that we are done with spells. We actually have one more I want to talk about here. In terms of our core spells, we'll briefly talk about our cooldowns in a second too. Primordial Wave, 30-second cooldown, generates 12 Maelstrom. Just read it out here. Blast all targets affected by your Flame Shock within 40 yards with the Primordial Wave, dealing 1.3 elemental damage, granting you Lava Surge. And this is typically going to be used after your Ascendant. So we're not talking about Ascendants yet. We'll talk about that in just a second. We kind of go into the cooldowns. But what this does is a big burst damage to everybody that has Flame Shock on them. So I'll put a Flame Shock on this guy. We'll throw another Flame Shock on this guy here in just a second. And you'll notice that it hits all the targets that have Flame Shock on them for a decent amount of burst damage. So I'll press it now, and you can see it hit both targets there. And then it also gave us a proc of Lava Surge. So typically you want to use this after you press your Ascendant. So this will segue me into our cooldowns now. So Ascendant's here, 3-minute cooldown, transform into a Flame Ascendant. And this is going to cast a Flame Shock at 100% effectiveness up to 6 nearby enemies, and a Lava Burst up to 6 nearby enemies. What you can do is you can Ascendants to apply Flame Shock to everybody, and then Primordial Wave directly after that for a lot of burst damage. We'll show that here in just a second. Actually, I guess I'll just go ahead and show it now. So we'll go ahead and Ascendants. You can see we have Flame Shock on all of our targets now, and then we can follow up with Primordial Wave, and now it hit all the targets. Notice you have our Stormkeeper here, 1.2 second cast. Charge yourself with Lightning, causing your next 2 Lightning Bolts to deal a whole bunch more damage. And same thing with your Chain Lightnings, and they will trigger something called an Elemental Overload, which just means you cast more of that specific spell. So show what that looks like, right? We can charge up Stormkeeper. And I did this a little bit earlier, and you can see our Chain Lightning, our Lightning Bolt is glowing now, and we can press it. And they're instant cast. There's an overload after that, and I can press it again, and that overloaded as well. And this is typically used at the start of a pool because this gives you a ton of Maelstrom to work with very early, and it allows you to get that early Earthquake out. And then finally, I'll talk about one more spell here, our Storm Elemental, and then we can kind of go into the opener and stuff. So Storm Elemental, go ahead and pull it into the talent tree, actually. It's a little bit easier to read. So Storm Elemental calls forth a Greater Storm Elemental, hurls Gust of Wind at your enemies. While the Storm Elemental is active, casting Lightning Bolt, Tempest, or Chain Lightning increases your haste. So this is a haste stacking, sort of like a stat stick here. But just to show you, right, we can come in here and we can summon the Elemental. And as he casts spells, we are getting a stacking haste buff. I believe it's right here. Yeah, Wind Gust. Okay, then the last thing we're talking about here is our Lightning Rod. This will actually be the last thing. So Tempest, Earthshock, Elemental Blast, Earthquake have a chance to make your target a Lightning Rod for 12 seconds. So those specific spells, typically in AoE, right, you're going to be using your Earthquake to do this. So you see none of these targets have a lightning rod on them, but if I target this dummy and then I cast Earthquake, you see there's a lightning rod on him. So what you can do is you can kind of weave in these different spells and you kind of weave different targets. You could apply this debuff to different targets essentially and kind of weave it in and out. And when they are a lightning rod, that lightning rod is going to take more damage from your lightning spells. So, kind of a min-max thing, but just kind of keep that in mind. As you are targeting through these different dummies, you want to apply lightning rod to all of them. Through your Earthquake, you can apply it through Elemental Blast, Earth Shock if you have that. So yeah, kind of a min-max thing. Let's go ahead and go to the opener. So very, very simple opener actually for Elemental Shaman. Honestly, probably the most simple opener I've ever seen for a spec. So the idea of our opener is to pretty much get everything on cooldown so that we can go into a big Ascendance window. So it's literally just press your cooldown buttons before you get into Ascendance. So get your Storm Elemental down, cast your Stormkeeper, and then you're going to cast your Chain Lightning on Pool. And that Chain Lightning is going to build up a lot of Maelstrom for us on Pool. So not a lot going on there. Let's go ahead and go into the single target priority and kind of tie everything together here. So here is our single target priority here. So kind of like we said, we want to get our cooldowns out. We want to get that Storm Elemental out, start stacking that haste, get your Stormkeeper out. You're going to follow that up with a couple Chain Lightnings to get a lot of Maelstrom early. And then you want to go into that Ascendance window. Now, you do not press Primordial Wave here. Primordial Wave is kind of more of an AoE ability, and you'll notice that once we get into the AoE priority. But if this was the AoE rotation, you'd be Primordial Waving after this Ascendance. So ideally, you would like to have a Tempest once you go into that Ascendance window if possible. But if not, that's totally fine. You will skip over into an Elemental Blast. And you make sure that you're using an Elemental Blast with a Master of the Elements proc, which we didn't talk about. It's going to be right here. Casting Live Burst increases the damage of your next healing or your next Nature, Physical, or Frost spell by 50%. And that's kind of why it says up here, you want a Flame Shock when you don't have Master of the Elements up, because you don't want to waste that proc on a Flame Shock, essentially. Don't worry about it too much in the opener. Doesn't really matter. Just get a good opener. But after the opener, you're going to make sure you're not consuming this buff with a Flame Shock by accident. From here, like we said earlier, you completely ignore Echoes of Great Sundering and single target. Now, Ice Fury does have a higher priority in single target than it does in AoE. Another thing you want to be careful with Ice Fury is you don't want it to consume your Master of the Elements either. You typically want to save Master of the Elements for like a Chain Lightning or an Elemental Blast or an Earthquake. Fusion of the Elements buff. This is just the buff that comes out of Ice Fury to make your next Frost Shock do a whole bunch of damage. So if you have the Fusion of Elements buff, go ahead and Frost Shock and then Ice Fury. And from there, just kind of fill with your Lava Burst and your Lightning Bolt. Okay, that's it for the single target. Let's move on to the AoE. So AoE, pretty much the same thing. This is where that Primordial Wave gets kind of mixed in though. You want a Primordial Wave after you Ascendance, but the opener window is the same, right? You still Storm Elemental, you still Stormkeeper. You follow that up with that Ascendance into a Primordial Wave. After you do Stormkeeper, of course, make sure that you are using Chain Lightning to build that quick and early Maelstrom, but just be careful with it, right? Because it's very, very easy to overcap. So as you start to get towards that Maelstrom cap, you're going to start working in some Earthquakes. It's very, very easy on your opener to cap on Maelstrom. That's one of the main ways to kind of jip your opener is just by overcapping. All right, we can take a look at that really quick. I can kind of show you what that looks like. And you can see already after one Chain Lightning, I'm at full Maelstrom, right? So I want to make sure that I Earthquake to get rid of some of that Maelstrom before I go into these next Lightning Bolts, right? See, you can see I'm elemental overloading. That's the reason we're getting so much of this Maelstrom. So just, something you kind of need to just be aware of. And again, before you Earthquake, you're going to make sure that you Elemental Blast before that so you can buff up your next Earthquake. I would recommend to get a weak aura that kind of tells you which button to press in AoE. It's going to tell you, hey, if Echoes of the Great Sundering is not up, press Elemental Blast. If it is up, press Earthquake. Then yeah, use your Tempest on cooldown, weave in those Elemental Blast to proc the Echo of the Great Sundering for your Earthquakes. Then tab target through as you cast an Earthquake to spread out that Lightning Rod. From here, you can Ice Fury if you're in a movement phase. If not, you can kind of sit on Chain Lightning as your main filler. Now, another thing I want to bring up too really quick is we're talking about Primordial Wave here and your Ascendance. So your Ascendance has a chance to actually proc on its own through a talent called Deeply Rooted Elements. So as you do your rotation, you're going to randomly transform into, you're going to randomly ascend essentially. And in AoE, whenever you randomly ascend, that Flame Shock's going to get spread out and that's a great window to follow up with your primordial wave. So just kind of keep that in mind. That will happen in your rotation. And then here's one of the weak cards I was talking about here. It's called Elemental Shaman 1+1 skill monitoring. Just Google it. It will pop up, and you can just copy and paste the weak R string. But the way it works is as you go into your rotation and you get enough Maelstrom to actually cast your Elemental Blast, it'll say, hey, you've not procced Echo the Great Sundering. Go ahead and press Elemental Blast next. And then now that we have Echoes of the Great Sundering, the weak R is going to recognize that. It's going to say, hey, press Echoes or use your Echoes of the Great Sundering proc. And it kind of keeps you in line in terms of which button to press. So now it's saying Elemental Blast. It's just going to go back and forth. It's a great way to be able to monitor that buff. So just going to briefly show you like a very general opener, right? You'd go into a Stormkeeper here. We'll use our pet into an Ascendant, into a Primordial Wave, Elemental Blast, Tempest, Chain Lightning, Elemental Blast, Chain Lightning, Earthquake. We do have a Tempest proc. We'll go into our Elemental Blast, more Chain Lightnings, into an Earthquake. And I didn't do it very great there, to be honest. I did grossly overcap on my Maelstrom, but that's kind of the general idea. I'm just going to throw this out there. There's actually a weak R that I made a long time ago. I'll just throw it out there. Sorry, not a weak R. It's a macro I made a long time ago. This is just a cast sequence macro that goes back and forth between Elemental Blast and Earthquake. This is great to use in AoE. It's not very good to use in single target, right? Because we ignore Earthquake. But in AoE, to kind of make it less complicated going between the two spells, let me go ahead and go to a Stormkeeper here. And when I press this Elemental Blast as my Q, now it's going to change to Earthquake. And it kind of stays in line with this weak R here, and you just kind of go back and forth, and you kind of turn it into one button, right? You're kind of on your Q only for your Maelstrom spender, right? And you're not having to say, okay, which button do I press, Q or E? Just makes it a little bit easier for me. What you could do, what I used to do is I would have two of these on my bar. I would use E for AoE, and then I'd use just Q only for single target for Elemental Blast. So you could do that too if you wanted. All right, guys, that's the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you in the next one.